It's time for the Phil Ferguson Show.
Well, hello, everybody. This is Phil Ferguson, and you are listening to the cleverly titled The Phil Ferguson Show. This is show number 258, and we've got a couple of fun things coming up in this show. We're going to talk about a brand new rule called the due diligence and how it may or may not affect you and how it may affect me, how it will affect me a little bit. This is different than the fiduciary rule, which I was all excited about, and then it's going to go away. I mean, technically right now it's delayed for 18 months until July 1st of 2019, but without a major change in politicians in D.C., I can't imagine that it survives. So there's that. But the new thing is due diligence, some changes there, and I'll go over that here in a few minutes in the show. The other thing, and I want to talk in general terms, I'm not talking about any specific subject, so take a breath. Pause with me for a moment. One of the concerns I have about social media is that people can pick a side on an argument, on a topic, and aggressively, violently defend that position without knowing real details about what has happened. That concerns me. Take a little breath. It kind of goes with this philosophy, and I've talked about it on my show a little bit before, which worries me. Two things now come to my mind that are growing in frequency in America. One is the philosophy of I've got mine, fuck you. And the other one is I'm right, I know everything, and I can't be corrected, and I can't admit that I've made mistakes. Those two things both seriously bother me. And if you listen to the show every week or so, whenever it comes out, you'll know that I've had people recommending to me to not correct myself on my show because I undermine my authority. I don't care. For me, it's all about being correct. I hopefully give you the best and most correct information, but I miss things. I genuinely make mistakes. So it's important for me, as expediently as possible, if I think the mistake is relevant, to come on and correct the mistake. I was stunned then, I'm still stunned now, that people thought that that was a bad idea. If that really bothers you, don't listen to my show. I will continue to keep making mistakes because I am a human, and we have to embrace those mistakes and not hide from them. I want to give you an example. This is from President George Washington as he left office. I believe this is the farewell speech, Washington's farewell address from 1796. And I'm going to try to read a little phrase here, or a couple sentences actually. And it's a little tricky for me because it's in a different style from a couple hundred years ago, but I'm going to give it a shot. So here we go. Quote, "Though in reviewing the incidents of my administration, I am unconscious of intentional error, I am nevertheless too sensible of my defects not to think it probable that I may have committed many errors. Whatever they may be, I fervently beseech the Almighty to avert or mitigate the evils to which they may tend. I shall also carry with me the hope that my country will never cease to view them with indulgence, and that, after 40 years of my life dedicated to its service with an upright zeal, the faults and incompetent abilities will be consigned to oblivion, as myself must soon be to the mansions of rest." End quote. I think the gist of this is George Washington acknowledging that he is flawed and that he has probably made mistakes. He tried his best, and he must assume, because of his personal limitations as a human, that he has made mistakes and that people will look upon them kindly and not judge them too harshly. We need more of that. Can you imagine Trump? Okay, Trump can't, I couldn't read all these words very easily. Can you imagine Trump saying something like that? No, that we need something like this where we can acknowledge that we make mistakes. So I guess I beg thee, I implore thee, I beseech thee, when on social media and even when in person, try to give the other person some room for compassion, that even if you think they're wrong, they may have made an honest mistake. Of course, it doesn't apply in every situation, but let's have a little compassion, a little less of the assumption that no one can make a mistake. And of course, we have to get rid of the idea of I've got mine, fuck you. We really need to find a way to work towards taking care of each other. And I'd like to see more of that. All right, that's my rant for today. I'm so sorry. We'll take a quick little interlude here. We'll talk about due diligence. And then when that's done, we have an interview with Karen Garst, who is the, editor for the book Women versus Religion, Women v. Religion. And we're going to talk to her and hopefully over the next couple of months, several of the authors that contributed to that work. And I really do hope and expect that you're going to enjoy those. Also, soon after this goes live, I will be heading down to Austin, Texas, where I will be on an episode of The Atheist Experience. And because of that trip, the next show will probably also be slightly more than a week from now. And I have some trips coming up that may end up resulting in shows being days late. I might even skip a week somewhere in there, which would mean a show would be 14 days apart instead of the normal 7 to 8 or 9 or 6 or whatever. So, bear with me. I'm trying to do this while I have time. Yay, good for Phil. I've gotten too busy to always do this in a precise and timely manner. So, again, hopefully you enjoy and sit tight. All right, this little section I'm going to call New Rules. Some of this applies to all listeners, and some of it applies specifically to clients of mine, clients of Polaris Financial Planning who have accounts at TD Ameritrade. But this probably will apply to anyone that's listening. There's some new rules, and I'm not talking about the fiduciary rule, which appears to have gone away. I'm talking about an update to the due diligence rules. I know it's wacky. There's so many little rules, but here is the deal. This all has to do with trying to prevent money laundering kind of activities or terrorist funding. It goes all the way back to, there's this thing called the Bank Secrecy Act, and I don't even know when that was enacted, but it was updated with the Patriot Act, which occurred after 9/11, of course. And it provides authority to the Treasury for financial institutions to collect information. And those rules were then outsourced to an organization called FinCEN. And you're going to love this. FinCEN, FINCEN, stands for the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Yeah, I know. Who comes up with this stuff? But there it is. So there's this organization that oversees the rules, or at least some of the rules regarding an account that you may have, an account that anyone may have. A couple of things that have changed specifically at TD Ameritrade, and this is for clients. If you change your address, if you move, it is now more important than ever that you update your address. In the past, I used to be able to do that for you, and this actually makes a lot of sense. But for now, I cannot do that for you. So when clients contact me and say, hey, Phil, you're using the wrong address for me, it's because I pull your address from TD Ameritrade, because I also want to make sure that I use the proper address. And TD Ameritrade has ways sometimes to track and change your address, even if you don't notify them. There are databases and companies that track when people move. That's how junk mail follows you when you move. But TD Ameritrade uses it for your benefit, but they don't always know that you moved, and you have to tell them. So I cannot change your address. You have to go to TD Ameritrade to change your address. If I send you something to your old, now wrong address, it is because your address is wrong at TD Ameritrade, because that is where I get my information to send you stuff. So for clients, go into TD Ameritrade and make sure your address is current. If you are not a client of mine and you have accounts somewhere else and you move, please try a little harder. Think about it more and changing your address. Another thing that changes with this is the applications have all been updated, and the applications now have more questions on them, questions about you and how much you make and other things that weren't on the forms before. It's not a big change, but it's a little bit more, a couple more check boxes that you have to fill out. And all of this may change even more because the rules don't officially go into place until May 11th of 2018. And of course, now it's late April, so it's not quite in effect yet, but a lot of broker-dealer firms, and TD Ameritrade is one of them, and I'm sure most of the others are doing the same thing. They're trying to implement all of the rules in advance so that they are 100% in compliance with the new rules, but the new rules haven't been formally published yet, so things might change, new things might come up. Another thing that is going to be potentially problematic, and it just happened to me for the first time today, is moving money between accounts is going to be more difficult. Not really, really hard, but something that has kind of been a little convenient, lax, it has to do with titling. And so titling is the name on the account. And that's something that when you open an account, that cannot change. That is very, very difficult to change. Even if you change your name legally, you can do it, but it's going to be some paperwork. But if you have husband and wife, we're going to have John and Mary Smith. John and Mary Smith open up a joint tenants account. And in the past, someone could do is they could call me and they say, hey, Phil, there's $5,000 in our joint account. Can you move $5,000 over to John's IRA? I used to be able to call up TD Ameritrade as an added service for my business, and they would take care of that. That is no longer an option because what is happening in the eyes of this due diligence rule is that money is going from the ownership of John and Mary Smith to only John Smith. The accounts are not like titled is the phrase that they use. So the one account is John and Mary Smith. They both have access to the money. If the money moves over to an account that has only John Smith's name on it, and any IRA, Roth IRA, 401k, 403b, by necessity has one person's name on it. Remember, IRA, the I stands for individual. So without additional paperwork, I will not be able to, you will not be able to move money from a joint account to an individual account because technically the other person that owned it in the joint account is now losing ownership of that money. So that person must sign a document clearly articulating that they understand they are losing ownership of that money and they are okay with it. So you're going to have files on form, documents filed, and I don't know what that document is yet. I think I know which form they're going to use, but they might create a new form that says, I, John, I, Mary, allow money to go from our joint account to John to Mary's IRAs or individual separate accounts. So just something to keep an eye out for. It'll be something that's going to be very difficult for me to do going forward is to take money from a husband and wife or husband and husband or wife and wife account, a joint account, I guess I'll just say, to an individual account without that additional paperwork being present. One of the ways around that is to directly deposit your money into the IRA or Roth IRA yourself. You may not be able to do that within a specific institution, but if you send money via a check or via an ACH, automated clearinghouse transaction, that is likely, my understanding as of today, to still go through because you're sending the money. and you have the ability to send the money, but transfers within a firm are going to be more difficult. All right, everybody, welcome back. This is Phil Ferguson, and of course, you are listening to The Phil Ferguson Show. With me today, I have a very special guest, Karen Garst. How are you?
I am terrific. It's not snowing in Oregon.
Well, I have freakishly warm weather, I guess what we would call normal temperatures for this time of year, but I've been, I guess, getting almost used to it being 30 degrees every day, and now it's like 65, and I'm not sure what to do with it. So I'm suffering from the heat. I actually had to close up my office, and I don't dare turn on the air because it's not that warm, but my office faces south, so now it's toasty.
Well, I did a podcast with somebody in Michigan yesterday, so I did have to feel sorry for them.
Now, we had talked before, a year or two. It's been a while.
It was my first book.
Yeah, I was going to say previous because then it sounds mysterious, like you've written 20 of them. But the book was Women Beyond Belief, Discovering Life Without Religion. Can you give me just a quick recap on that as a background, and then we can move on to newer stuff?
Sure. The reason I wrote it is the Supreme Court came out with its decision in 2014, Burwell v. Hobby Lobby, where they said this craft store didn't have to provide certain forms of birth control to its female employees under the Affordable Care Act because of its religious views. And I was retired, and I happened to have lunch with a writer friend of mine, and she said, "You need to write a book." Well, guess what came to mind? So I spent a lot of time researching the history of religion, the impact on women, and I solicited 22 women. Some were born in Zimbabwe, Peru, Germany, the United States, and they talked about their personal journeys away from religion, and marketed that. I think I was on 50 podcasts for that book, so I appreciate being on yours. And then I attended a number of conferences, in particular the Women in Secularism 4 conference, and I met a lot of women who were active in the secular movement. And I thought, okay, I'll do another book.
Sure, and the new book is Women v. Religion, The Case Against Faith and for Freedom. So it sounds more like a little battle, I guess.
Well, it's a little more, I don't want to say academic, but there are 13 essays in this book, and most of them are written by women atheist authors, like Valerie Trico, Abby Hafer, Candace Gorham. They're active, they've already written a book, or they're bloggers, and I asked them each to explore a specific issue according to their expertise. So, for example, Candace Gorham is a mental health counselor, so she's going to talk about the impact of religion on the psyche. I have an ex-Muslim in this, and she talks about what was it like before Islam. And interestingly enough, there were women goddesses, there were women warriors, and even Muhammad's wife was responsible for a caravan. I'm not sure if you say caravaner or what you say for that. So the other thing that's a little different is I've also included an essay by Kaylee Whalen, who's a transgender woman. So I think, with those 13 essays, we've got a lot of ground that is covered. They're very well researched. I will tell you that verifying the reference for Islam was exceedingly difficult because they just don't have the book.
Right.
They've got a lot of other things, hadiths and sayings and things like that, in addition to the Quran. One of the things I've been trying to do is to market this book to women's studies programs in universities across the United States, and it's kind of a laborious process, but I do believe that religion is one of the last cultural barriers to gender equality. And if those programs are not looking at the impact, particularly in the United States, of Christianity, I don't know how they're talking about gender.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that I want the listeners to know that if you particularly like this topic, and I do hope that you do, today we're going to cover it kind of on a top-level summary kind of thing. And, we've already talked about a lot of the authors I'm going to have several of the authors over the next few months come on because I think this book is special and it deserves a lot of extra attention. So I want to provide really deep conversations in some of those 13 individual sections. So I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you for that, Phil. I really appreciate it. And I've been on some podcasts with them, and they've done some alone. And I think each one of them is really an expert in their field. And as you well know, if you look at the 100 top releases or the 100 top books on atheism on Amazon, for an example, only 5 or 6 are written by women. And yet who dominates the churches? Women. So if we really want to see religion gone, we got to focus on women, and we're not doing enough of that.
Well, you're right. There's not enough. And it's also often it falls on the woman to be the caregiver and the person who brings up the children more of the time because the man's off working more often. Not always, I understand. And if they're religious, the children become religious.
Exactly. And you have a tendency to raise your children the way you were raised. People think that raising children is innate and you know exactly what to do. That's not true. We learn it. And one of the ways we learn it, how to raise children, is how we were raised. I read about this fascinating experiment with a rat. And when the rat baby is born, the mother licks it to clean it from all of that stuff. Well, they did an experiment where they didn't let the mother do that. And when that child, that baby, rat baby, I'm sure there's a word for that.
Rat baby.
had her baby, she didn't do it either. So that was not something that was innate. That was something that's learned. And I assure you, at 40, when I had my first and only child, I had a big book. And I read the big book. I didn't know. I mean, I was the youngest in my family. How would I know how to raise children?
Yeah, and I know I never licked my children when they were born. That would have been different. Now, I was skimming through, trying to read, and unfortunately, I'm really awful, and it's a bad time of year for me. I'm very busy, but found a couple of things that you had written that I wanted to share with the listeners, and then we can talk about them if you'd like.
Okay.
This is, of course, from the new book, Women versus Religion, and you have a nice introduction talking about the whole project, and we've kind of already talked on this, but it was very well put in the book, so I'm just going to read this. All of the Abrahamic religions originally subjugated women, making them less worthy than men, unable to participate in religious leadership, and even responsible for original sin. Women were considered property and could be bought and sold like slaves and killed for committing adultery or for not being virgins when they were married. They couldn't own property, and they were considered unclean. Well, I think that gives a pretty good summary of how women are less than men from a biblical perspective.
It's so fascinating. Some of the research I've done in the last 5 years is how did we get to monotheism? And I know we talked about that a little on the last show, but it is fascinating to look at what were the symbols of a goddess. And particularly in Canaan, where the Israelites came to, there was a goddess called Asherah. And Asherah is also the word for a pole or a tree. So associated, worship in nature, go out, trees, poles, etc. And a goddess in many cultures has been associated with a snake because the issue about female goddesses is cyclical. It's about nature. It's about the earth. And a snake rejuvenates. And lucky snake gets a new skin every year. Boy, I wish I could do that. So if you look at Genesis and look at the story in the Garden of Eden, they basically take everything that was important to the goddess, the tree, nature, snake, woman, and they turn it on its head. Snake, Satan, it eventually becomes Satan, not kind of right away. And they eat the forbidden fruit of the tree, and it's Eve's fault. So I would love to go back in a time machine, but I know they did that on purpose.
Oh, I don't doubt it. Now, the funny thing is I have a funny take on that story when I talk to Christians, is that if I recall correctly, the tree, when you eat the tree, you gain the knowledge of the difference between good and evil. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so
the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
Yep. So Eve ate the fruit, not necessarily an apple, just fruit. She ate the fruit. Now she has the knowledge, and she can tell the difference between good and evil. And what does she do? She has Adam eat the fruit. So therefore, that must be a good thing for him to do, because she now has the knowledge to understand the context and the moral rectitude of what she is suggesting. So she actually should receive all the credit for them escaping the Garden of Eden by understanding what's right and wrong.
That's a fascinating take on that. I had never thought about it that way.
Isn't that neat? And I walk Christians through that, and their minds are just blown, because it's like it says right there, it's the knowledge of good and evil. She ate it. She now possesses the knowledge, and she went to Adam and said, "You should eat this." Because now she knows it's a good thing to eat. And of course, that makes the God a liar, and the snake the one that tells the truth. And I think it's a wonderful story to throw back at Christians, and they just kind of flounder around and not sure what to do with it.
Well, and that whole dichotomy between good and evil and heaven and hell, that really came from the Persians. So in the first millennial BCE, people were looking at things in that context. And if you go back to the goddess, there isn't that dichotomy. It's much more holistic. It's, the cycle rejuvenates itself. Nature comes back. It's not linear. And there's a book written by Lawrence Schlein called Alphabet and the Goddess, where he feels the real impact of writing was to change our thinking from the cyclical nature to more linear. And I'm sure that writing had an impact on that. But it is a fascinating concept, I think.
Of course, another section here, I'm not going to read this, but in the introduction, you go into how you think, and I can't argue with you, that religion is the single greatest blockade, detriment, obstacle to women having equal rights, not just in Western democracies, but around the world. Talk about that a little bit, if you would.
Well, no matter what economic system we have, let's call that the big mountain, all of the institutions are going to support that system. So you're going to have an education system that's going to talk about our economy being good. I mean, you're not going to have an education system that slams capitalism.
Right.
You're going to have one that slams communism, right? And vice versa. You're going to have, you could have anything, entertainment, movies, etc. But a key institution or a cultural body of knowledge is religion. And I think I was right in 2014 to say, whoa, something's happening here. Because after the election of Trump, we have seen religion not just creep into the White House, but walk in the front door. And more, whether it's Pence or Trump or anybody else, religious views are holding sway on certain of our policy measures. And I'm not saying I predicted it or anything like that, but that Supreme Court decision to me was I thought we had separation of church and state. I thought when you open a business, you're on the public sidewalk and you have to serve everyone who comes in. How can a company use its religion, and since when could a company have a religion to discriminate against people? And I think that was a terrible decision, and I don't know that we'll ever get it reversed.
And of course,
because if Trump appoints one more person to the Supreme Court, it's over for my lifetime. You're
referring back to the Hobby Lobby case, of course.
Yes.
The idea that a company has a religion, I can't wrap my head around that, how wrong that is. And it wasn't like it was one person's opinion. That was the winning opinion. That was the majority opinion.
Well, there had been a previous decision that basically said a corporation was a person.
Yes.
Which led to the huge influx of corporate money into politics, et cetera. And it was the basis for this decision, to the extent that if a corporation's a person, then it can have religious views. And they're both ludicrous.
Yeah, it's a odd thing. So we have all that fun. And of course, like you said, the book is 13 different authors on top of yourself. in addition to yourself, I guess. Can you give us a kind of a quick rundown, maybe chapter by chapter, real briefly, so that people know what to look forward to?
I talked about Candace Gorham talking about the impact of religion on our psyche. And I learned yesterday she was a former evangelical minister.
Oh.
So she has a lot of, and experienced depression herself. And so she really does an excellent job of explaining that. And then we have Lori Weissman, who is Jewish, ex-Jewish, although Jewish is a cultural thing as much as anything else. And she talks about women in Judaism, an oppressed and isolated minority within an oppressed and isolated minority. So a lot of that, what we talked earlier about ritual purity, etc. I just read a book called The Book of Separation, and it was about a Jewish woman, Orthodox, leaving and getting divorced. And it was fascinating. I grew up in a pretty liberal Lutheran church, so I didn't have any of that. But, you know, not being able to have sex this week, having to go to the mikvah bath, etc. So that was really new to me. Alexis Record, who wrote a review of my first book, and I didn't know it, and I was at the Reason Rally talking to Linda Lascola from Rational Doubt and the Clergy Project. She said, oh, yeah, Alexis wrote a review of your book. So I've met her, and she's great. She was raised, her entire schooling, grade 1 to grade 12, was accelerated Christian education, which really wasn't education. There were no teachers involved. It was learning about God. She said she memorized a chapter of the Bible every month, and it was the old King James Version. So she has a lot to say. Dr. Valerie Trico, you may know her. She wrote Trusting Doubt. Her chapter nails every treatment of women in the New and Old Testament and the early Christian church that degrades women. So if you ever want to write something about that, you go to this chapter. It's there. She nails it. We're property. And then I have this ex-Muslim. She's writing under a pseudonym, of course. She feels more comfortable that way, Hiba Cha. And she was raised in Aleppo in a conservative Muslim family. She now lives in the United States. And as I said earlier, she talks about the queens of Arabia. There was a Nabatean empress, Julia Domna. There was a woman, Hind bint Utbah, who fought against Muhammad, a woman warrior. So that's something, again, that I learned a lot because I have not yet read the Quran. Then Aruna Pap, it is fascinating. She lives in Canada. She works with South Asian women in domestic violence. And she went through it herself. She was brought up in India, and she saw a teenage girl set on fire and killed next door, and nobody did anything because it was the honor culture. So wow. Reading her story, now I want to say there's a good ending. She got divorced, she remarried, and she's gotten a number of awards for her work with immigrants. So she has come a long way. Then Valerie Wade and Deanna Adams kind of split up looking at the impact on African Americans. Valerie takes it from Africa up to the civil rights. And remember that a woman in Africa, again, there were queens, there were goddesses. They not only lost the feminine divine when they came, they were slaves. So they got hit twice when they were forced to adopt Christianity. And that continues today. And sometimes it's the only social safety net for people. I'm not going to remember her first name. Hutchinson. She writes about the impact of religion on African American women in particular. And it's just, you know, their money gets taken. They're supposed to tithe. There's all these prosperity gospels, etc. So Deanna takes it from the civil rights forward, and she talks about how the churches weren't that involved in the civil rights movement. They kind of stood by the side. We always think of Martin Luther King as the Reverend Martin Luther King, but the churches were somewhat reticent to join it. So she talks that and up to the current time. It's a fascinating study of Black history. Then I have I'm trying to cover all the bases here. I have two Hispanic women,
sure.
Marilyn DeLasia and Hypatia Alexandria. And you may know Hypatia. She co-founded the Hispanic American Freethinkers with her husband, and they work on that. And again, that it's a cultural issue. We talked about the cultural institution of religion. Well, that Catholic Church is all caught up in what it means to be Latina in our country. And one of the things is marry early, have lots of kids. Well, what does that do to you? That means I'm 18 or 16 and I don't even know what my personal goals are. I don't even know what I'd like to do as an education. Well, you're cut off completely from that. And after you've had 4 or 5 kids, let me tell you, taking care of them and going back and studying, Hypatia's working on her doctorate. So that's very, very impressive. And it's Sikivu Hutchinson. I remembered her name.
Yeah.
Okay. Then the last 3 that I'm going to talk about, Kaylee Marguerite Whalen is the digital strategies and social media manager at the National LGBTQ Task Force. I wanted to get those all in there. And of course, she was raised in the Catholic Church and, shamed for being different. She didn't understand. She didn't have access to information. So she has really done a lot. She's a young woman, but she's done a lot to educate people and fight for rights of people who are different. We know that religion is having a tough time with coming to grips with that. They're not even able to deal with gays. And then Dr. Abby Hafer, who's the author of The Not So Intelligent Designer. And I was in 9th grade and I took a class in evolution. I should have been an anthropologist. I absolutely loved it. I was a Lutheran then, and I said, gee, I wonder when God breathed the soul of man. Was it Cro-Magnon? Was it Neanderthal? I was able to incorporate all these things together. But her book is fascinating. And as a woman who's had a child, I can guarantee you that this is not a perfect design, because once we started walking upright, our hips needed to be narrow, and then the baby's brain got bigger, and so it does hurt a lot. And that's why our children are born so unable to just step out into the world like a giraffe, is because we couldn't have them later. We wouldn't be able to give them birth. And so she knocks all the intelligent design and everything and talks about women. And the one example she gave is about a cell that instead of having a binary gender system has 7 genders. So gender 1 can mate with 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 2 can mate with 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So in order to mix their genes, they have an opportunity to mix with 85% of the population, where we, more or less, have a chance to mate with 50%. So what a great design. To have that much variety, to have that much more mix is something that might be a beneficial mutation. And then finally, Greta Vosper, she wrote a couple books. One is With or Without God. And she leads a congregation of Canada's largest Protestant denomination, the United Church of Canada. And guess what? She's an atheist. And she came out several years ago to her congregation. I have to be honest. I have to tell you, I do not believe in this male deity, but I think we can work together, and I think we can learn together. I think we can make a difference. Some people left, some people stayed, some new people came. Now, of course, the denomination is having a little struggle with an atheist minister, but she must be making an impact in Canada because they keep postponing her hearing.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. And of course, as you go down this list, thankfully I've had a few of them on previously, and we're going to have several of them on. I almost wish I could do all of them, but then the show would be one topic and I'd get bored myself. But if you want to read all of this, you get the book, right? I mean, that's the whole idea. And the book is available when?
Well, it's supposed to come out June 1st, but as you know, that's just a guess. And my publisher told me this week that they're already printed. So
Ooh.
I imagine that bookstores, Amazon, etc. You can pre-order it anytime, of course. Barnes & Noble, Amazon, etc. But I think it's going to be out in the next few weeks.
Oh, you think it might go before the June 1st?
Yes, that happened with my last book.
Oh,
because it's already printed. So now it's just a question of distribution.
Well, and I was worried that, we're a little too far ahead of schedule, but that is fantastic. So for some people, by the time they're listening to this, the book will be coming out very soon. And if you catch it, a few weeks after it comes out, maybe it's out already. So go check your favorite bookseller. For me, I'm lazy in Amazon, and people bring it to my door.
Hey, Phil, we do Sunbasket for food.
Yeah.
I can beat you on that one. I don't even cook.
And again, the title of the new book.
Women v. Now, it's not VS, it's V period. Women v. Religion, the case against faith and for freedom. And now I'm going to have to move up. I'm going to have to call my expert in WordPress, because I say at the end of the introduction, go vote on my website, faith or freedom. So I'm going to have to get that up there pretty soon. And as always, if your listeners read the book and if they liked it, putting a review on Amazon makes a huge difference. It can be 3 sentences, but as an author, I will tell you it makes a huge difference.
Absolutely. And just when people are looking, of course, it has edited by Karen. Is it I Garst?
No.
L. I can't read, man. Karen L. Garst. And there's a picture of Lady Justice, I guess. Is Lady Liberty? Lady
Justice.
Lady Justice, yeah, I had it right. I was trying to think of, is it the Libra, the zodiac sign?
Oh, I don't. All I know is I'm a Gemini.
Yep. Me too. And in one hand, she has the scale of justice, and then the other hand, she has the sword. So you're going to be weighed and measured and found wanting if you go with the faith version, I guess. But that's how I'll put on it. Now, the other thing that I noticed, and I hope you don't mind talking about it a little bit, is when we went to have this Skype call, on your Skype, it says something about MythCon and that you're going, and I'm supposed to ask you about it. Talk to me.
Well, I have a little thing that says went to MythCon. Want to talk about it?
Yeah.
I'll give a little background.
Yes,
Mythicist Milwaukee was very supportive of my first book. I was on their podcast, and I also I have a presentation on my YouTube channel, which you can get to by just saying Faithless Feminist, which is the name of my blog. So if you put in Faithless Feminist in Google, you'll get me. And I did this presentation of elimination of the female divine, things we're talking about earlier.
Yeah.
And I met them at the Reason Rally I went to a couple years ago. And Sean Frazier said his mom loved the book. So I kind of felt like I was adopting him, And last year, they told me that they would give me a free ticket for the weekend if I publicized it. And I actually was able to give out a couple of free tickets to my subscribers of my blog. So that was a good deal. And frankly, I didn't pay much attention to who was there. I have a PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I have a good friend who lives in Oshkosh. So I was looking at it quite selfishly. Oh, I think I'll go see my friend. And she came down for the weekend. And then, the controversy came out. We probably don't need to talk a lot about that. Sargon of Akkad was there, and he's kind of seen as an anti-feminist, misogynist. And I had a chance to meet him, actually took my picture with him. But there were some, Melissa Chan did an excellent presentation. There were 2 Muslims, one ex-Muslim versus somebody who wants to reform the faith. That was interesting. The Church of Scientology, the person who created it was there, who's left it. And I think his son is doing it. So really, it was pretty interesting. But a lot of people in the atheist community got really upset that they were giving a platform to some of these people that they just thought were wrong. And so some of the people who were supposed to speak bowed out. And so there was quite a controversy about that. Then this year, I've got to tell you this. So Thomas Smith was originally going to debate David Rubin, I think, or question him, and he pulled out, so they put him with Sargon. So here's Sargon of Akkad, who's Carl Benjamin, debating Thomas Smith, and guess what the topic was?
What was it?
Feminism. We got 2 men talking about feminism. So I just, wheedled my way up to the microphone, and I asked the first question, which was, I'm the author of, and I cited the book and said, my goal is to get women to leave religion. I think it subjugated them. I think it's the last cultural barrier to gender equality, and we're not going to get there with two men talking about feminism. And it wasn't really well done. They kind of screamed at each other, and there was a lot of Sargon supporters in the audience, et cetera. So a few months ago, I got a call, and Sean asked me if I wanted to debate gender equality. And I said, well, after what I'd said last time, it'd be a hypocrite to say, no, I'm not doing it. I want women there, and I'm not going to step up to the plate, so I couldn't say no.
Right.
And I had a pretty strong feeling who I was going to be debating, and I was right. It turned out to be Karen Garst, who's a very popular men's rights activist. And so the question is, have women achieved equality in the United States? Gender equality, and I say no, and she's going to say yes, and then poor men. It's the men who are really disadvantaged in our society.
It's the oppressed men.
It's the oppressed men.
Well,
and the other thing, even after reflecting about it, I thought, if that audience is all for her, what better audience do I have to talk to? I don't want to just talk to people who agree with me. I'd rather talk to people who disagree with me, and I have been reading a lot and watching her videos, and frankly, I'm learning a lot. So to me, in my book, that's a great thing.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that, can you point out things in our culture, our society, in the United States of America, where maybe women have an advantage that men don't have? I think that's possible. I don't have to think that hard to come up with a few things. But overall, as a man, speaking for a man, I think I have it easier than the average woman, but maybe I'm wrong. And that's going to be your debate.
It's going to be an interesting discussion.
And so you've been boning up and watching your opponent's videos, huh?
Yeah, and frankly, when I was working with a marketing person to set up, my book and website, and he said, "Well, you have to have a blog," and at least I knew what a blog was. I should have kept track of all the new social media words I've learned in the last 5 years. But the first proposal for a title was Godless Grandmother. And I said, I don't really think we want to push my age so much here. And then he came up with Faithless Feminist. And I thought, well, I've always considered myself a feminist, but my feminism is from the 60s and 70s. That's when I was active. And the things I've been active in Oregon have been things like, in fact, we're having our 30th anniversary for WinPAC, which is Women's Investment Network here in Oregon, and we support pro-choice democratic women, and have been doing it for 30 years. And we have a woman governor. We have, one of the better states in terms of the representative of women in the legislature. But my focus was much more local, much more political. I had never even heard of third wave feminism. So I have learned a lot because I got a lot of pushback from that feminist label.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with it, and I'm not sure I understand all the nuance between all the different waves. I just kind of look at it as everyone should, where possible, have an equal shot at achieving and obtaining. And if you work hard and you study hard, you should be able to do just as well as anybody else. So.
Yeah, and I think there's some really good reasons why there's some historically men have not gotten custody of children. I think it's improving significantly. But if we look at the stereotypes in our society, what are the words you come up with men to stereotype them? What are the words you come up with women? Well, do you think our justice system as one of the institutions isn't going to be influenced by our culture? That 50 years ago, women were staying home with kids. So, who are you going to give custody to in a divorce? So part of what has to change is our whole culture, and men are going to have to be seen differently than aggressive, work 78 hours a week, those kind of things for the system to say, okay, well, and you may be perfectly appropriate as a father, but there are biases within our system, and they're not all good biases.
Right.
I think it's really important that men are involved. My husband, I took 2 months off because it was during a legislative session and I was lobbying after our son was born, and he took a month off.
I have a friend who went through a divorce a couple years ago, and she was strongly encouraged by her attorney to attend a church because even though she's the woman and by default in the court's eyes might get custody, however, if he's a good church-going man and she's outspoken atheist, she might lose custody of her own children. So she ended up going to a church just for the cover to keep her rights and not have that at risk. So there's that battle where, she should get the kids because she's the woman, but she shouldn't get the kids because she's a downright dirty atheist. And it's just, those aren't the things that we should be judging people on. We should judge them based on their ability and their compassion and their efforts. But,
Absolutely. But I think we're naive if we don't think that every institution has been influenced by religion. And that judicial system, it's almost like an unconscious bias they have that they're going to get this. She doesn't go to church. He goes to church, and he will probably make a big deal of it.
And, the people that are in high levels of politics and courts and something like Rotary, which I'll talk about more. I've been teasing my listeners for a while. I eventually have to do a whole segment on that. The people who've been in for 10, 20, 30, 40 years are often men. They're often white men, and they're often Christians. And so they bring the things that they learned as a little kid. They learned to lick a rat, and they continue to share that, even though it's no longer, not even if it was a good idea then, but they can't really change fast enough. And that's a problem, I think.
Grace before meals, I bet.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. It's always tricky with family, although almost everyone in my family, both sides now, mine and my wife's, no longer does that. So I'm so excited about that.
Well, I was at a gathering for Easter, and I think the only one who was there might have been two in there, and particularly my mother-in-law just turned 97, and we were all going to say grace for her, and then it just kind of fell apart.
I went to I think it was a baptism ceremony a couple of years ago for a family member, and they were very hesitant in asking me. They wanted me to be there, but didn't know if I could go. And I was like, it doesn't burn my skin that much. I'll be okay. And the funny thing is that as they're going through the ceremony, I'm just trying to play along and just be quiet and go along. And all the relatives know that I'm not into this, and they keep looking to see if I'm going to make a scene. And after it was all done, people come over to me and they say, well, Phil, I agree with you, and that stuff's silly. And I go, why don't you tell the other relatives that? Because like 4 or 5 people all came to me and acknowledged that they agree with me 100%, and that it's silly. My wife and I were at a Catholic baptism several years ago where they had an oil to exorcise demons and then an oil that allows Jesus to get in. And
really?
During the whole process,
Really?
Yeah, I know, it was hysterical. And during the whole process, the priest switched the oils. And so he put on the one that allows Jesus in and then put on the one that kicked out all the spirits. So I'm like, there's nobody in there now. We had to really try to contain ourselves and not bust up laughing at the ridiculousness of the whole thing. And, you look at the modern world and the phones that we use, the cars that we drive, the planes that we hop in, the internet and all these on-demand everything. And then on Sunday, our brains just shut off and we go back into patriarch mode, and it just kind of gets reinforced again.
Well, Alexis Record said on an interview the other day, she was raised in this accelerated Christian education, and nobody wanted the diploma. They wouldn't accept it for anything, and she's 36 and she's taking her first class in science. Can you imagine?
Wow.
Her first class in science.
And
I was taught evolution in North Dakota when I was, in the 60s.
Yeah. Well,
and 50 years later, she's learning there's no such thing.
Yeah.
It's tragic. I think one of the reasons, I've written about abortion and how that became a political issue. But they really saw how to divide people politically with that issue. And they broke some of the Catholics away from the Democrats. And whether it's women's reproductive rights or something else, religion is just a tool. It's just a tool for the people in power to do what they want.
It is, and I've done a lot of reading about how that's happened over the last 60, 80, maybe even 100 years in the United States, where the really wealthy have used religion as a tool to push towards fascism, starting way back from the New Deal. And even Paul Ryan, when he gave his speech recently about leaving, not retiring, but not running again, lamented that he wasn't able to do his one last thing, which was to cut dramatically entitlements, that these shiftless, lazy people that lose their job and want unemployment. And this is a guy whose dad died when he was 16 and got government money to go to college himself. And
pretty hypocritical, huh?
Now he won't support college programs that would help someone like him, who he now looks down upon. I cannot wrap my head around it. I'm not the first person to say it, but I've been saying it for years that often, I'm getting too political, the Republican strategy, or a lot of people in America have this philosophy of, I've got mine, fuck you. And it is very concerning to me.
Oh, absolutely. You come out against abortion and talk about a fetus being a child, and then when it comes to welfare, you talk about the slutty mother.
Yeah.
Come on. Welfare is there for the children.
Well,
hello.
And bringing in religion and gender and even race. Several years ago, when I lived in Champaign, Illinois, I would often go and debate protesters at Planned Parenthood, and I would debate them to the point that they would leave the property. Now, it's in Champaign-Urbana, which is liberal like Boston or Seattle, so I had a head start there. But I had one time, they were talking about how the purpose of Planned Parenthood is to abort black children. And I said, what? And they said, well, just look around. Look at this neighborhood. They put Planned Parenthood in the middle of a black neighborhood. And I said, what makes you think this is a black neighborhood? And they go, well, just look at it. And I go, what is that even supposed to mean? They're like, well, all the houses are run down and blah, 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 blah. And I said, the houses are run down because people have bought these and divided the houses up. This is student housing. This is 2, 3, 4 people per house in little broken up apartments. And the owners don't have to make the houses look fancy. They just have to be cheap for a college student to stay there. And because it's the University of Illinois, it's like 90+% white. So what? I can't. I just just so much wrong with those statements that it just made me infuriated.
I'm very impressed you did that.
Well,
London just passed a bill that they created a distance, so they're going to have to be across the street from an abortion clinic. They can't be right there and impede women from going in.
Who passed that law?
London, UK.
Well, in Champaign, they had a very nice thing is that Planned Parenthood basically owned an entire city block. And so you could never get enough people to surround the building and the parking lot. So once you could drive into the parking lot, you're on Planned Parenthood property, and the protesters would never go on the property. They'd be on the sidewalk or towards the street. And so what I would do is I would show up and I would argue with them. And then when they get frustrated, I would go inside and give $10 or $20 or $50 per person. So the more people they had protesting, the more money I gave. And so I would tell them next time, because they would do it every once a month on Friday was when they would protest. And I said, I'm going to be back next month. Please bring more people because then I'll give more money. And so it just kind of rattles around in their head that what they're doing is counterproductive.
Boy, how generous of you. What a clever strategy.
Well, I had once many years ago at a national atheist conference, I had a box to collect for Planned Parenthood, and I brought this literally a big roll of money and dropped it off at the Planned Parenthood. And they're like, no, don't leave, don't leave, don't leave. And they buzzed me through, which is sad. They buzzed me through the bulletproof door. And of course, the person at the counter is behind bulletproof glass. And they all wanted to pose with me because I had kept donating money. And so they all wanted to take a picture of me there donating this big roll of money. It was kind of funny.
Well, I've been a member of the National Organization of Women and the National Abortion Rights Action League for, 40 years.
Yeah, it's just one of those things, when you talk about you want small government, unless it's something you want to push on people. The hypocrisy just is everywhere and in everything. But we're having great fun, but we're not talking about the book. We could do this all day, I think. If someone wants to know more or learn about the book or get information, or if someone listens to this that does podcasts, or even better, not necessarily better, sorry podcasters, or if they also are organizing a conference, how can they reach you to get connected to one of the authors?
Well, I think I would give you my blog address. It's Karen@faithlessfeminist.com.
Excellent. So
go email me. I'm on Twitter. You can go to my website and do a contact, which is www.faithlessfeminist.com. Once you get a website, you're not going to change it.
Yeah.
I like being the faithless.
Well, every once in a while I hear, and maybe there's a teeny little bit of merit because, you were talking about in the book about the 4 horsemen came out, of course, all men. Maybe it's a little harder to get women to speak at a conference, but I think that can be a bit of a cop-out. And if you're not getting equal representation at your conference, take a look at the list of the people that are writing for this book.
Absolutely. And I will
Karen.
be speaking at the American Humanist Association in Las Vegas at the end of May. I will be doing that slide presentation, From Goddess to God, Elimination of the Feminine Divine. So if people are in Vegas, stop by. And I'll have both books for sale because the other one's out.
Yay. Well, Karen, thank you so much for being on the Phil Ferguson Show. I appreciate your time very much. Is there anything that we've missed that we need to cover before we part ways?
Just a big thank you. It was a wonderful conversation, and I really appreciate your time, and I really appreciate your reaching out to some of the authors. I think you will have some very interesting discussions.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show.
My mum only lied to me about one thing. She said there was a God, and but that's because when you're a working class mum, Jesus is like an unpaid babysitter. Do you know what I mean? It's just sort of like, she wants you to be good. The best of working class mum where I grew up she wasn't hoping I'd be a doctor or a lawyer. She hoped I wouldn't be stabbed to death in a barroom fight, So the best thing to do is, if he's God-fearing, then he'd be good. It's a good rule of thumb because, I went to Sunday school from about the age of 4 till 8. There was just great teachings of Jesus. I love Jesus. He was my superhero. He really was. God was magic, right? But Jesus was just a man. And what I loved about Jesus was he was kind. And he was brave, and I thought he was amazing. And I thought he was brilliant, like just a brilliant guy, So I was about 8, and my brother must have been 19. He came in once, and I was doing something from the Bible, and I said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Oh, drawing Jesus." And he went, "Who was Jesus?" And I said, "Well, he was the Son of God." He went, "Why do you believe in God?" Right? And my mum went, "Bob, shut up." And I knew she had something to hide. And he was telling the truth. And I knew from body language. And then I worked it out, and I was an atheist in an hour.
In an hour?
Yeah.
You're listening to The Phil Ferguson Show.
Of course, it's that time of the show to wrap things up. I do have a couple of reviews to go through real quick, and thank you for those. But before I do that, I wanted to mention that I had an email about somebody because I, a few episodes ago, had talked about American funds. And I wasn't picking on them specifically for any reason. It just that they happened to surface to my radar. And I talked about their promotions and how it's factually correct what they would promote, but what you actually get is not necessarily what you expect based on the promotions. And I had someone email me that they have American funds inside of their simple IRA, and they're all Class A shares. And after the show, they went and checked and found out that they're paying 5.75% load inside of their simple IRA. And a simple IRA is almost always set up by a company that doesn't want to go through the hassle of having a 401k because of the reporting and regulations required there. And the nice thing for you as a simple IRA is that if the company gives you money, at the very moment they give you money, it's yours. You don't have to wait for vesting. It's your money. So that's kind of nice, and it's actually kind of simple. It's a simple IRA. It's more like a 401k, but it's not exactly like a 401k. But I told them that they don't have to buy the American funds. So first thing you could do, if you have a simple IRA, the money can go into cash within the simple IRA. So you have the account, and then you have things that you own inside of the account. And one of the things you can own is cash. The other thing I told them, which was a great surprise to them because their employer did not tell them, is that you can set up your simple IRA anywhere. So if you work for somebody that has a simple IRA and the investment choices are not good, you can go to Vanguard.com. Doesn't help Phil in the least, but you can go to Vanguard.com and set up a simple IRA there and direct your employer to send the money there. There might be a possible situation that your HR people say, no, we have the simple IRA set up with Company X. Well, by law, if your employer sets up a simple IRA, they have to send money wherever you direct them. That's one of the biggest perks for you as the employee. So if you have a simple IRA and inside of it you have investment options that suck, you can move the money. You can open up a new account and have all new money go to the new account at Vanguard and get index funds. So just be aware of that. I thought it was kind of amusing, and it's something that I might have said. I think it was the person I was communicating with. They said, so basically this 6% becomes a stupid tax. So yeah, stupid in the definition of meaning you didn't have the information. Yes, not that you aren't intelligent or can't learn, but you just didn't happen to have this information, and you didn't research and didn't study, and you have other things to do. We all do. So yeah, it's kind of a stupid tax. And apparently in that situation, there was the possibility that the advisor that was hired to set up the simple IRA is a friend of the owner of the company. Again, it happens. So keep an eye out for yourself. You have to learn how some of this stuff works. If you get questions, you may email me, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. And of course, if you are happy with the show, you can donate to something like the SSA, Secular Student Alliance, or you can go leave me a nice 5-star review on iTunes. Very helpful, actually. Shows that have more high reviews, I think, in their algorithm, do better and get exposed to more people. So that actually helps me quite a bit. I think all of these reviews are new and I haven't covered them. So I think they're short, so I'm going to do these pretty quick. I have one here by Congo Jumper. 5-star review. Great to hear interesting topics covered in depth with rigor and sources. More, please. Thank you, Congo Jumper. Another one here by Lowiski? Wiki? Lowy? Siki? I don't know. It looks like it's Polish with the CKI in the end. Lowski. I'll just say it fast because then it sounds like I know what I'm talking about. Phil gives great, well-researched advice on how to money. I love that phrase. And leads always fascinating interviews on atheism and all kinds of other topics. He's honest, intelligent, and enjoys cursing. Well, that's kind of true. It's always a pleasure to listen to Phil's show. Thank you very much. Another one here, Chili Blaster, 5-star review. Great podcast to learn more about finances and investing. I love the skeptical approach to money. Secular topics are great as well. Phil, keep up the great work. And by fourth one here, after a couple weeks of no reviews, I'm kind of drowning here. Duke 67, I love your podcast. It is both educational and entertaining. Speaking as someone who has been a longtime listener and someone that you have interviewed, I can say that you are just as professional on both sides of the microphone. Keep up the great work. Oh, that's so sweet. I'm not sure who Duke 67 is, but thank you for the kind words. And thank you all for listening. And I'm very thankful for your indulgence that the show doesn't come out every week. It's close to every week. And every once in a while I get 2 shows out in less than a week, but often I'm a few days behind what is the socially acceptable once every 7 days. And that's probably just the way it's going to be for a few months anyway. So thank you for listening, and I do hope to see you somewhere in person. Until then, ciao.